Hi, my name is Jeannie Lauren Dowden for Conduit News, and today we're joined with Ryan Gorman. He is head of school at Anthem Classical Academy, a recently new school here in Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here and glad to be able to talk with you. Just talk a little bit more about who we are.
Yeah, okay. So first, before we talk about Anthem, tell us briefly about yourself. You were in public school systems for a while, and then you transitioned over. Just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I got into education because I wanted to make an impact on young men. So I got into coaching, and I wanted to coach football, and thought I was the next greatest X's and O's person to ever grace the sport, which I quickly learned I wasn't. A good sense of humble pie, but the locker room's a really great place to try to just impress upon young men what life could mean. And in that process, you always refine yourself and learn a little bit about who you are and how you're growing. And so it reflected on me. Why I was in education was to try to continue to develop character for specifically young men. But as I taught, I realized that it wasn't just a young men thing. It expanded to all of us. It's a human thing. It's a uniquely human endeavor that we have these virtues that we aspire to. And so that kind of seeded this idea of what we're really doing in education. So it'll probably carry its way out. But that's where I got started, and then moved my way into administration, a couple of different districts here in Northwest Arkansas. Good experiences, not so great experiences, but a good time to try to make education what I thought it should be.
And then so you spent several years, as you mentioned, in different public schools here, but then you finally was like, okay, I'm going to venture out, look into classical education. Talk to us about that transition from public schools to private, the launch, the inception of Anthem.
Sure. I'll kind of dovetail the end of that story into that. I regularly as a logistics person and really enjoy all of the nuts and bolts of how things work. And so naturally I was granted, master schedules, testing coordinators, things like that. That was my typical role. But I found myself parroting the same line over and over again, which was test scores, ACT, and 18 years old. And those were the three things that I kept saying. 18 years old, I had nothing to do with. Kids were going to get older. That's going to happen. ACT score, I would not ask you what you scored on your ACT, nor would you ask me. And that's the thing about adults, is it really doesn't matter. But we, in certain brands of education, when we say we want an educated public, what we really are translating to is we want to have the highest scores that we look best in the newspaper. And that is unfortunately a really shallow and nearsighted view of what kids should or could be. And so that kind of, in my own wrestlings, worked with where are we casting them into? Where are we sending them into? Are they just an economic agent? And that was kind of the beginning of the end for me in what we call public education. But I believe in an educated public. And so those shifting of words matter. But I started learning about the character virtue development that is in classical education from schools that are around the country and other mentors that started saying, we care more about who they are at 35 and 40, how they love their family and how they serve their community and how they lead in their church and the groups that they're involved in. Where are we developing those skills and character beyond the economic impact? And so it was one to shift from children are an assembly line product of the Industrial Revolution and into they are virtuous characters that can be molded and crafted and bent towards what is true, good, and beautiful in our world, not just what is economic. And so that was this big shift for me. And I said, I can't put my name behind this anymore. 18 years old and how they're going to get a job or just college feels so narrow. And in a model of education like classical education, and we think it's new, but it's really not. It's how everybody was educated up until just after the Civil War. It was the way our founding fathers in our country were educated. It's the way that education has been thought about for a large period of time. And it's only recently that we've shifted to this economic thought process. And so to re-engage it for my own sake, but also to reinvigorate it for here in Northwest Arkansas, something that I was really excited to be a part of, partner with other families who saw the same thing happening and wanted to bring that to be. And so Anthem was the idea that we wanted to join with parents and with the saints of old. And so an anthem is never something sung by yourself, even if you're the only one singing. And so our name is even a play on that we look into the history element of where have people wrestled with or answered good questions throughout time, and where are we partnering with to see a synergetic or a harmonious effect with the parents that we're talking to, the students we're talking to, and the teachers that are in their classroom.
I'm sure coming out of COVID, partnering and working with the parents and looking at education differently and helping those kids realize that they have a purpose. Coming out of COVID, I bet that was probably something really refreshing for parents in this area.
Yeah, so my experience was the 3 years probably leading up to COVID. No one knew what it was, but there was this turmoil stirring.
Yeah.
And you could sense that parents felt like, are the school partnering with me, or are you trying to drive a wedge between me and my child? And I think the effects of COVID, not the virus itself, but we refer to COVID as this epic time period. But in all reality, it was a catalyst, both for us as the founding of the school, because it gave some space in our own personal lives to see that grow. But it really was a catalyst for parents to be able to see what's going on and what types of conversations are happening in classrooms, in counseling offices, in clubs and after school programs. And you started seeing, hey, wait a minute, this isn't the bill that I was sold. This isn't the partnership of the community that I thought it was in every respect. And so parents started asking the question, and this is really one of those classical questions that we like to ask at Anthem is, who is man and who is responsible for man? And so if we say that man belongs to the state, then it's not a hard jump to say that the children belong to the state. And that's a dangerous ideology when you have a biblical worldview that would say parents are given the right and responsibility to raise children in fear and wisdom of the Lord. And so those are just two fundamental paradigms that are not new. They've been asked and wrestled with since the Greeks, when the state came to be, or even before. Even Egyptians kind of had this idea. So you can trace those questions all the way back, and it's to think that we are chronologically mature as modern age people is almost snobbish to think that we're the only ones wrestling. And so parents are asking those questions, and then COVID comes and this catalyst happens of, I don't feel like my view of how my child should be raised is being matched on this level. And so it accelerated something that was already stirring under the surface, and it just brought it all to light in a really quick venture.
You have Albert Chang on the board for Anthem. He is wonderful. We love everyone there at the U of A at Department of Education Policy. He spoke not too long ago to the Senate Education Committee, and he was talking about this, the very thing that you are saying as well. And he was talking about just the hunger for classical education that parents have now, more so than in recent years. And he also talked about the growth of classical education here in Arkansas. And just talk to us a little bit about what he shared with the Senate Committee, if you could.
Yeah, the hunger there is recognizing just how, I'll speak to the parent side, just how much I think that 18 years old and ACT bill is no longer something that many parents want. It seems, again, short-sighted, and it was coming into that. He spoke a little bit more about how, and he can do so far more eloquently than I, so I'll defer to him on most of those things. But he spoke to how the idea is that parents should have the full option of where they want to send their students to school. That the funding source for them is actually just goes back to that question of who owns the child, who is the child owned by, and that's ownership even feels funny to say, because that's not what we believe. It's steward and cared for and raised well. But if we think that a parent is the responsible party, and there's always exceptions to the ideal, and there's brokenness in our world, and so we see where the need for institutions to step in and support. But on the whole, parents are the ones who are going to make the best decision for their children. They see them the most, they know them the most, they should be influencing and pressing into them the most, even in our own brokenness, but they still are the most equipped to make the best decisions for the future of that child. And so if we're saying they have no choice, they go because of where their zip code or where their neighborhood goes, then you're really taking all of that away from the fundamental idea of who is responsible for that kid and what matters the most to that family. And so he's pressing and advocating, as well as Dr. Wolf, I think, spoke at that Senate hearing as well. And tremendous men who are influencing what we're doing and what we're trying to do in classical education. And the idea being that parents want to see what they're teaching at home matched in what they're teaching at school. And they want to know what is being taught at school matches and harmonizes with at home. And so one of the things that always broke my heart in public education was we feel that we really think that this teacher matches what we believe or is a believer if you go down a Christian worldview route and says, we feel, so we really lucked out this year. The phrase was, we think that they're a believer, so we got lucky, so it will be
You're
fine.
Right.
That's the phrase. And I heard it over and over and over again. And that's what started just tearing at the fibers of my heart and breaking it, because parents shouldn't guess. None of those three things are what parents want to do. Feel and think, you should know.
Yeah.
Lucky should not be the case. It's not a luck of a draw that my child gets the education that I desire for them. And it's not fine. No one ever sets out and says, oh, the children will be fine. As soon as we say that phrase, it's the fastest slope down into mediocrity, into dissension, into just turmoil that exists, because it's not what we're called to. We're called to shift towards a standard of excellence and a standard of this virtuous, good living that ultimately helps and lifts societies as a whole that we're all part of.
I love that. Well, speaking of school choice, parents having the option to send their child where they would like to. There's a big push for school choice across the nation. We've seen it in Arizona. DeSantis has done it in Florida as well, Virginia. What do you hope for the landscape of Arkansas? Do you think that it's possible that we could have universal school choice? I know that Anthem's enrollment for the second year doubled, I believe. And so parents are wanting that. But do you think that our legislature is in a place to provide that yet for these parents?
I think that's a big question, and I appreciate it, because I think that the legislature probably needs to ask that question of how long can we play this game? Not to borrow the line from maybe too many public educators, but there is and needs to be a sense of urgency every year that passes where we don't equip parents and students to have the best virtuous civic understanding of education that we can put in front of them, not to mention the greater themes that exist throughout history. Then we are adding another year of students into an ill-equipped world, or ill-equipped to go into the world is maybe the better way to say that. And so I would say that then press into them, they need to answer that question. Is a lot of proponents right now would say, well, we have school choice. People can go to whatever district they want to, but that really doesn't change the narrative. It's still organized in the same mindset. And so universal school choice is an interesting addition to that. I've seen, kept up with Arizona. Indiana's doing some really interesting things, and it's fun to watch. But if we truly believe that parents are the closest and best equipped and best to know and shepherd and steward the soul and heart of their child best, then they should be the ones making the choice of where that child goes. And if we're going to fund or defund that student based on where they're enrolling, then we as a state are participating in kicking a can down the road before we can redeem a generation back to what good and virtuous living should be. And so if we say, okay, we're going to say that kindergarten can go where they want to go, and they can choose not where the kindergartner wants to go. I'm not going to put that on the kindergartner. I'm going to put that on the parent. But where that parent wants that child to go, and where that is nurtured, and that virtuous life is lived out and modeled and studied and weighted, and that parent wants that option, why would we restrict that by simply saying, well, because this institution needs to survive, then we have to keep you going to public school setting? And it's not about test scores. And you've heard me say I've been here for however long, and I haven't mentioned that phrase yet, because other than the ACT, that's the only thing I mentioned. Test scores don't matter. They do. It's important. We want them to learn the great and good things. But alongside of that, if we say, let's develop what prudence and temperance means. Let's develop what courage means, and patience and long suffering and wisdom, and then how they score on a math test will come with those things, because those are the bigger questions of humanity, not of the economic impact. And so those will be there, those will come into place, but learning is that lifelong endeavor, and where is the good soul nourished, I think matters the most. So school choice would be largely something that I would hope and advocate for. Obviously, we would benefit, because I think it's something that families who don't have their own financial means to be able to afford private institutions would then be able to exercise their option. I had a debate about this with an acquaintance of mine who's in a public school district here. I won't name her, but we don't do this in any other government supported industry. No families love them well who are on food assistance programs. The government's never told them what grocery store they can shop at based on where they live. You can't shop at this, you can't shop at any other one. You can only shop at this one because this is your zip code. We don't do this with any other concept. We equip the families to make the choices that they need to do. This is the only one where we say, nope, the government's going to pull that idea away from the family. And that seems very counterintuitive to everything we know to be true about when families raise their children well, they partner well with education, they partner well with the character development. Those children flourish and serve society in the long run. So,
great insight, Ryan.
Thank
We
you.
could probably, there's
For
so many other
hours.
things.
It'd be
I
great.
know. And it's not that I'm biased, but I do love Anthem because my daughter's there.
We love having her. It's so sweet.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I hope that you come back on again
Absolutely.
soon.
Be happy to. Thank you.